this morning, it's evening in Greece now. As a nation, the Greeks gathered around these monuments. The schools paraded through the main roads of the towns, and wreaths were laid at the foot of these monuments that list the names of the people from each island and village and town that went to the Albanian front and fought and did not come back. And as we also commemorate this event and remember the heroism, we've also got this connection, this relevance for today. It's not just a historical event, it's a reminder that Greece unites against foreign invaders, remarkably so, as October 1940 showed. Greece is historically rooted with the Western Alliance and will always stand with the Western Alliance, and the Western Alliance will stand with Greece as it did during World War II. And the third element is this preparedness. All those steps that Italy was taking to try and, in a sense, make claims and turn the Mediterranean into an Italian lake was something that the Greeks were very much aware of and prepared to challenge.
Okay, well, sorry for making you go through it twice, but just want to make sure, because like I said, we lost the feed there for a number of minutes. Thank you for a really great presentation here, especially the slides really, I think, added a lot of good dimension to the presentation. I remind our audience to use the chat function to submit a question to Professor Kitroeff. We have certainly plenty of time for questions, and we'll try to carry the program as long as we're able to have a dialogue going back and forth. However, let me get started here a little bit. I mean, you're talking about Italy and its Mediterranean lake. But isn't it a little bit analogous in terms of what modern day Turkey is doing today, or trying to attempt to do today through its blue homeland policy? Certainly it has designs, maybe not over the entire Eastern Mediterranean, but certainly on the Eastern Mediterranean, it does believe that it is its own personal Turkish lake.
And indeed, if one looks at those maps that the advocates of this blue homeland are projecting, it looks very much like a kind of history has repeated itself. We have a neighboring country of Greece, this time not on the west side, but the east side of Greece's borders, making claims on what has been historically part of Greece and part of the Greek history. I mean, it's interesting, the Italians were claiming the Roman Empire, therefore the Mediterranean is Italian. Well, guess what? Before the Roman Empire, the Mediterranean was a Greek lake. So those claims are historically inaccurate. And any claims made by Turkey are even more historically inaccurate, because that particular country never really had a very strong presence in the Mediterranean. The Aegean Islands are clearly historically, ethnically Greek. So those claims seem to me to echo a kind of imagination and a kind of imperial mindset, which has got no basis in history or fact.
You mentioned something which is very important, and certainly history has proven it to be so, that whenever the Greek nation has been attacked from external forces, it has come together. As they say, in Greece, that's the time where we gotta respond. Would you say today, again, because we're talking about the contemporary lessons regarding OXI, would you say that in Greece today, you live there, you have the pulse on the ground in terms of the political parties and so forth, regarding, again, whatever forces right now, rhetorically, mostly, but nonetheless, threaten a Greek territorial sovereignty or question Greek territorial sovereignty and integrity, again, as our aforementioned NATO ally to the east, is there a policy unity amongst all the parties as to what positions we should be dealing with and pursuing regarding such threats?
Well, first of all, let me say, I think the so-called national issues, as the Greeks, the term that the Greeks use for the issues of territorial sovereignty that affect Greece and Cyprus, generally the public is somewhat, it's not a kind of daily issue for the public, because I think a lot of people trust in the Greek armed forces. The average Greek citizens say, okay, there are incursions, air incursions in the Aegean. I'm confident that the Greek Air Force can deal with them. This issue of the naval issues in the Mediterranean, full confidence that the Greek Navy can address those particular issues. As far as the political parties are concerned, I think the problem, there's less of a unity in the political parties, because I think politics in Greece is very much, it's a kind of, the parties compete against each other. So making kind of points about, we are more patriotic than you, we've got a better policy than you, that you can see that going on in Greece. But I really think that's on the part of politicking and rhetoric. I think ultimately the political parties are very much clear as to what should and might, what they should do when something might happen, and they would have been unity. I look back, on the period when Greece was under a left-wing government, the Syriza government, that everyone expected that Greece might change that Western orientation I was talking about, and go to maybe other directions. Nothing of the sort. If anything, the Greek-US alliance remained strong, and I think that for me is the clue. They might say what they say in Parliament. There's an issue now within New Democracy over who's got the better foreign policy. But when I think push comes to shove, there's going to be that type of unity.
Thank you for that. And I still don't see any questions, so I got to continue trying to be here Sunday morning news host for a little bit longer. Professor, you mentioned about Western Alliance and how the Western Alliance, well, Greece has supported the Western Alliance, and how the Western Alliance has supported Greece. I would venture to say I'm not sure that's always been, the case, throughout the modern history. And certainly this year we commemorate, unfortunately, the Black anniversary of 50 years of the invasion of Cyprus, and we certainly didn't see the Western Alliance really step up and assist in that endeavor. And what we have today on Cyprus is we have a country of the European Union that is being occupied now for 50 years by a member of NATO. So you can make the argument that a NATO country is occupying a member of the European Union, but yet when it comes to Ukraine, as we rightfully should, we're talking about rules-based international order and Putin's aggression and illegal invasion and so forth and so on, but we seem to be selective in terms of how we apply the rules-based international order.
Yes, and I've been reading very carefully about those events that happened 50 years ago in June, July, August of 1974, when there was the attempted coup against Cyprus. The attempted coup on Cyprus, the Turkish invasion, and not only the non-reaction of the United States, but the tolerance that the US at the time showed and allowed Turkey to not only occupy, but have a second phase of occupation that was completed in mid-August of 1974. And I'm wondering, I think what happened was, at the time, Turkey took advantage of this huge crisis that was going on in the United States, the Watergate crisis, in which the Nixon was on the way out, and we unfortunately had Henry Kissinger stepping in and taking the major decisions. And Kissinger had this so-called realpolitik, pragmatic policy, in which he believed that it didn't matter for the United States whether Turkey took part of Cyprus or not, and that was a kind of unfortunate event. Unfortunate coincidence which led to a tragedy, not an unfortunate event. I think if I look at US policymakers now, and I think what has been done, the situation in Cyprus has not been reversed, but I think US foreign policymakers, and you could speak better to it than I can, US foreign policymakers are much better aware of the situation now than they were back then.
Well, that's a long discussion, Professor. But I've heard the argument, and I'll switch over back to OXI in a second, because we're not talking about Cyprus today. I'm just bringing up a comparison in terms of where I have felt the Western Alliance failed Hellenic interest back in '74, and on a number of occasions since then, even until today, even though relations for both countries, with the United States especially, are an all-time high. But the United States is a country that can walk and chew gum at the same time. So even though Watergate was going on, I think we have the wherewithal and the bandwidth to be able to deal with multiple issues and crises around the world, especially when they affect our own U.S. interest. And I remind everyone, for those who are not aware, that on the morning of August 13th, on the eve of the second offensive in Cyprus that took place and ultimately ended up in Turkey grabbing, the 37% landmass of Cyprus, of which it has until this day. Henry Kissinger walked into President Gerald Ford's Oval Office that day and stated, and I quote, "There's no American reason why the Turks should not have 1/3 of Cyprus." But that's for another day. We do have a question here from one of our participants who have been following us. Our chairman of our foundation board, Leon Andrus, he asks, what other countries joined Greece in their October defense? How effective was British aid?
That's a very interesting question, and one that we could talk a long time. The only country which was in a position to come to Greece's aid at the time was Britain, and British forces landed on Greek territory and came to Greece's defense, not during the Greek-Italian War, but at the time in early 1941, when the German armies were planning and moving through Yugoslavia to attack Greece. Interestingly enough, there were certain differences among General Papagos, who was the chief of staff of Greece, and the British as to where the Greeks should have a line of defense. There were certain strategic plans that Greece had certain defensive lines. One of them was right up against the Bulgarian-Yugoslavian border at the time. Then there was another one further south. If that line had been breached, then the forces would fall back to Mount Olympus. As you know, Mount Olympus, there's a very narrow corridor between Mount Olympus and the sea. So that was a natural border where Greece would defend. And then, of course, that then was Athens, and then was Peloponnesus. But the British forces were not enough. Britain didn't really commit enough forces. They didn't make the decision that they could actually bring enough troops to match the German attack. So all they succeeded in doing was to delay the German southward move, and they did that stage by stage, which brings us, and their last stand was Crete. There, believed, the British believed, strategically thinking, that they could hang on to Crete, that they could defend Crete. It's a discussion for another session. They made some really bad strategic mistakes. I showed the slide of the parachutes falling. The British didn't realize that the Germans were focusing on the Maleme airfield, which is on the west side of Crete. They lost that airfield, which allowed the Germans to land, and then the occupation of Crete by the Germans became a matter of weeks, if not actual days. So they did, but the British plan was to defend Crete, but that was the only part of Greek territory they felt they were able to do.
But even there, it was a miscalculation or stupid action, maybe a Freiburg, I believe the New Zealander, who had the
Yes.
opportunity to destroy the airfields on Crete and chose not to do so, therefore giving the Germans an opportunity to be able to land their aircraft. And then when that happened, as you say, it was game, set, match. But nonetheless, that was 11 days to destiny, as I believe the book or the movie is called. And that's
Yes.
another great commemoration of Greek heroism in World War II. And we should always remember these. We have a question from a student who took part in our AHI annual student foreign policy trip to Greece and Cyprus this year. Her name is Alexandra Lahiri. She's from Dallas, Texas. She's an undergraduate student. She congratulates you, Professor, but it asks, because she's very interested on the genre of World War II and the role of Greece, and wants to know in terms of articles, books, scholarly information that's related to Greece and the resistance and so forth. Now I can put you in touch, but maybe for the general public who's listening, you can maybe bring out any information that could be useful for this.
Well, yes, no, thank you for this question as well. And there are certainly some books, and I will mention them, but I do think, and I'm speaking now from as having taught for many years at Haverford College, I became aware that the average American high school student had absolutely no idea about what had happened in Greece during World War II. Each country tells the history of World War II from its own perspective, but because as Greek Americans, I think we've got a big interest in informing the American and the English speaking public of what happened in Greece. And I feel that we haven't told the story as well as we could, or we haven't told the story in all its aspects, and that's something we should do. But there are obviously some books that cover Greece during World War II. There's obviously one book that I believe Ahi was involved in publishing, George Blitas' book on Greece during World War
Yeah,
II.
he calls it the first victory.
The First Victory. It's a block. Yes. So, blockbusters are good, but sometimes you need maybe some more introduction, but it's certainly there. It should be on everyone's bookshelves, because it's a detailed and exhaustive account of what happened. The other historians who've written about Greece during World War II, John Iatridis, a longtime Greek-American professor, has written about Greece in the 1940s. There's an Australian historian, David Close, who's also written about Greece in the 1940s. There's Mark Mazawa, the British historian at Columbia, who's also written a book on Greece and the resistance in Greece. So those are a few. I'm forgetting some things, and I'd be happy to kind of think more about it and produce a more comprehensive list. These are great books. As I said, we need more.
Well, this is something that's always been a pet peeve of mine, Professor, regarding the books you mentioned regarding our public George Beatrice's book, which we published. Unfortunately, it's out of print right now, and we don't have any more available. It was an opus, as you say. Probably was about this thick, and it was exceptionally well detailed. He was not a historian; he was an engineer by background, but he really meticulously went into great detail regarding this particular genre of Greece's role in World War II. We have also done a conference many years ago on Greece's pivotal role in World War II and its importance, of which we published those proceedings. We still have very few volumes of those left. And of course, we did one on the Truman Doctrine when it was the 50-year anniversary back in, I guess, would have been 97. And that was an important, post World War II historical heroic again action by Greece in terms of defending against communism. When they just had a major occupation and war, yet they fought another bitter, difficult civil war there to defend against communism and again save the West from communism coming into the Balkans and ultimately providing the Soviet Union back then with warm water ports would have really marginalized Western interest at that time and beyond, obviously carrying into the Cold War. But yeah, but get into it a little bit more, though, Professor. I don't think it's as simple as to saying, history is written by the winners, although we understand that concept. But these are historical facts. I mean, you went to school in the UK. I did all my schooling here in the United States, and I took a lot of history courses, of which there was, talking about World War II, not even a byline, not even a sentence, okay, regarding Greece's heroic role. I mean, countries were falling, major countries were falling in 3 and 5 days, and Greece was stood, I believe, approximately 193 days, and had the first victory. And I say this because, we can't allow for revisionism to take place at the end of the day. By not expressing what Greece did, that's just another form of revisionism, in my opinion. And I'll give you a point, and so our audience can hear too. When I visited Paris with my daughter many years ago, about 16, 17 years ago, and I wanted to go to Normandy and pay my respects to Normandy there. And the fallen heroes who spilled their blood for democracy, the rule of law, and for us to be able to enjoy the lifestyle we have today. I wanted to go there and pay homage. Go in there, the tour guide, and this was an English-speaking tourist bus of about 50 people from different parts around the world where English is spoken, or who understood English, obviously. And she started relating, vignettes of World War II. And she says at one point, I was kind of falling asleep. It was a 3-hour ride to get there. And it was early in the morning. And she says, the first victory of World War II was Al Alamein and Midway Island, okay, of which respectively took both in 1942. So that kind of jarred me up, and I woke up. And at one of the rest stops, the first one, I went up to her and I said, well, I said, I heard what you said. I said, but have you heard of what Greece did in 1940 on October 28th, of which they celebrate as a major national holiday of OXI Day in the defeat, of one of the Axis powers in Italy. Ah, yes, you're right. But do you think she came back on the bus and, explained, to the audience on the bus? She did not. And how many movies have we seen made in Hollywood on Dunkirk, which was an utter failure, okay, by the Brits, okay? But yet we've never seen any movie of this nature in Hollywood or anywhere else in the Western world. And you said, American high school students. I'm here to tell you there are a lot of Greek Americans students going up through college who don't know what OXI Day is. My grandson just did a poem on OXI Day at Greek school. I don't know ultimately, though, if this is taught in terms of what the true meaning of OXI Day is behind that. And how can we ultimately try to change this?
I think we've got to try and tell the story and tell it again and tell it in a good way and tell it in a way that will capture the imagination of the younger generations. There's so much to tell. You mentioned El Alamein. There was a Greek unit, a regiment fighting at the Battle of El Alamein, but who mentions that? There were even Greeks who fought during D-Day because they were part of the seconded to the Allied troops. But it's really telling the story, and I think we don't have the firepower in terms of numbers of historians. We don't have the numbers of documentarists, the presence in Hollywood for these stories to be told, and they are such effect. You can think about what's happening, what had happened. It's so heroic. The fighting in the snowy mountains of Pinos, which was taking place. I mean, that's cinematically it kind of grabs your imagination. And I think it's also to think about Greece. Greece has also got to do a better job. And coincidentally, I was reading the Sunday newspapers had the news about they're trying to dig up there were the soldiers who died up in the front were buried in mass graves, and no one knows exactly who's who and where. Each village knows they lost someone and they have the name. But what they're going to do with those mass graves, they're going to do kind of DNA, forensic anthropology, whatever that's called, to try and identify the names. And I think if we can actually get the names and get personal stories and have personal stories, the type of personal story that Saving Private Ryan came up with, which was a totally personalized thing that captured people's imagination. We need a Saving Private Ryan story on the Albanian front. And if we can get the names of the people and actually go there, I think it would be a tremendous movie.
No, I agree with you. All of a sudden, we're almost there, but I do have two more questions before we finish. One is, it's been argued by many in favor or against that Greece's efforts ultimately stalled Operation Barbarossa for Adolf Hitler, which he had to come in, of course, and save his cohort, the Duce Mussolini, from the embarrassment, that he undertook at the hands of Greece. All accounts are Hitler was not too happy with his actions because, it created a problem for him to come into Greece when he had no plans to do so. But this whole thing about Barbarossa and the Stalin of the whole German machinery with the Russian winter and all of the above, and how it ultimately did change the course of World War II. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I know that military historians go back and forth as they usually do on every issue, but I think that's another example. It's a kind of decentered thing because no one associates Greece down in the southern tip of the Balkans with what was happening on the Russian front. But that's another element of the story it makes total sense from a common sense point of view that the Germans were in fact delayed and had to come down into the Balkans, which they wouldn't have done normally. So that's another part of the story that we have to tell in some way, which will resonate.
My last question, because you're also a historian that delves into the Greek American community and to its maturation process for over 100 years here. Now, I've read and I've also expressed in presentations that ultimately what Greece's heroic efforts of October 28, 1940 did for Greece itself also were heroic for the Greek American community, at least in the United States. And what I mean by that, and I want you to opine to this, up until then, we were called, we were the greasy Greeks. We were attacked. We were, persecuted against, all of the above. And then, even though, regardless of the heroic efforts of AHEPA, which was founded in 1922 to fight against this racism and this bigotry regarding the Greeks, ultimately, though, that one moment changed overnight the perception of Greeks in the United States. Would you say that's 100% true, or is it true?
Yes, it's 100% true. That editorial in the New York Times is the first time that Greece is praised in such a way. And suddenly, along with Greece being praised, the Greek Americans, in a sense, benefit from that because they're suddenly associated with a country that is living up to Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis, as the editorial does. And that is a huge turning point. It could be that's another lecture of how the Greek Americans benefited, and the Greek Americans, of course, responded by helping Greece through the Greek War Relief Association. So that's another big dimension, but it's a turning point. Greece, in a sense, helps the Greek Americans at that point.
And certainly that is the one time that Hollywood under Spiro Skouras did step up in terms of the World War relief. I wish we had a Skouras today in Hollywood who might have considered investing some money to put in a movie on OXI and create a proper script around it, which would be a great story. We are at the 1 o'clock hour. Let me just offer some closing comments. And my closing comments are going to be in the form of two quotes. And the one is by Metaxas himself. He said, "Greece is not fighting for victory. She is fighting for glory and for honor. She has a debt to herself to remain worthy of her history. There are times in which a nation, if it wishes to remain great, gains by being able to fight, even if it has no hopes for victory." And certainly Greece did that and a lot more. And then on a more contemporary level, as I said, here at the Institute, we've taken great strides over the years to continue to try to promote the heroic efforts of Greece in World War II. I would like to read this quote, and I'll end with this. And you've heard me say this before, but as the professor said, we have to keep repeating it. We have to keep repeating it. We go to liturgy every Sunday. We hear the exact same things because we need to keep repeating it and to have an understanding. So the quote says, "As the years pass, it becomes more and more necessary to recall and record for new generations, just how the people of Greece, alone or with allies, gained and held for their country for a century and more the independence and democracy it possesses today. And how in one special moment in history, Greece at heavy cost and sacrifice, and with great courage and determination, played a pivotal role in World War II in defying the forces of tyranny and Axis aggression that were arrayed against not only Greece, but the whole Western civilization. It is an inspiring story," end quote. And who said that? General Andrew J. Goodpaster, former Supreme Commander of NATO. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for helping us for joining us today and to helping us celebrate an OXI Day, a great historical moment in the modern history of Greece. I want to thank, of course, Alexander Kitroeff for 7 hours. Well, you changed your time. You're only 6 hours ahead now, so you're not as late as it could be. So we thank you for this great presentation and discussion here today. I want, as always, thank, of course, our staff, Zach Otronakis, Alexandra Christopher, and Yola Pakchanian. And I also want to thank our ongoing sponsor of our virtual presentations, our president of our chairman of our AHI board of directors, James H. Lagos. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. We hope that you have a great day and a great afternoon, and we look forward to having you with us on one of our future virtual presentations. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. Thank you for tuning in.